Well, hey, Andy, it is so great to have you with us. It's not been that long since I've seen you. I was just in Atlanta recently, and I got to run into you down at Buckhead Church. But I want to say welcome back. I know that sounds strange, but you were actually here a year ago, about this time, a little earlier. I guess it's September, a year ago, here on our campus. And I just want to say thanks for coming back and joining us for this leadership group.
No, this is what I like to do, as you know. So.
Yeah. Well, I for those that are in our audience that are here today that may not know who you are, and I'm looking at a script here and I'm like, I don't even need to read this. You're the founder of North Point Ministries, starting with North Point Community Church years ago. Has
25 years ago, actually.
25 years ago.
This month, 25 years, we're about to have our birthday party, anniversary celebration this coming Sunday. So 25 years.
No kidding. That's so awesome. So 25 years ago, this coming Sunday, you guys are celebrating a huge and incredible run. And I get to be a part of almost 17 years of those, which was just an incredible journey for me. But it's grown into over 30,000 people in the Atlanta area, in multiple locations, 7 different campuses, plus 25 or so campuses, churches that have been planted outside of the Atlanta area. I don't know, I've been told 15 or so thousand people plus attending there. Millions of people watching your podcasts, listening to your messages, watching the TV program. The influence that God's given you and the organization is just tremendous. And for me, I try to do this every time. I know you don't love this, but every time I get the opportunity to tell people about you, the thing I say is, I've gotten to know Andy up close, and whatever you think of him, whatever kind of respect or level of influence he's had in your life, I just want you to know it's all real, because the closer I've gotten to you, the more I've known of you. You're the real deal. You're an authentic person. You've been a leader, a pastor, a mentor, a boss. And even it's been, and I want to say I've loved being away, but I've enjoyed being a colleague, and you've been a great friend to me over the years. And so I just want to say thanks for all that. And for the people that are listening, I want them to know that I have a tremendous respect for you, and you have incredible integrity as a leader to speak into the content we're going to talk about in terms of leadership today. So.
Well, I feel the same way about you. And I want your audience to know, when you left, or before you left, when you no longer were working with me or for me officially, we had a conversation where you were extremely, I asked for it. I said, hey, now you can say anything you want, right? So, give it to me straight. And Joel gave me a piece of advice that I then contextualized and shortened to a single sentence that hangs in my little office. It's not an office. That's just a little tiny room with a bunch of bookshelves where I hang sayings that I want to keep front and center. And Joel left me with one of those as it relates to the future of our organization and my role. And it was a profound insight. So this has definitely been a two-way thing. And I appreciate what you said, though, Joel.
Well, thanks for saying that. I was grateful I was able to make a small deposit after all the years of deposits you made. Today, we're going to focus our conversation on Andy's new book, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets, which is a culmination of content over many, many years of ministry. And I even think these come from a lot of core messages from you, Andy. The book is out now. I just got it a couple of days ago. In fairness to confess, I'm not quite done with it, but I feel like I've heard a lot of this content before. And I've heard you talk about making better decisions for years and years and years. And I know that for you, this is a core part of your leadership. I sat in leadership team meetings week after week after week with you, and rarely did you come in and start out with, here's a message I have for you. You almost always came in asking good questions. And I'm just curious, like in your leadership journey, when you trace that back, where did it dawn on you that was just a better way to lead? Like what precipitated that in the beginning and sort of launched you into sort of leading that way?
You mean with questions?
Yeah, just leading with questions and this whole idea that if I ask better questions, I'll make better decisions as a leader. Where did that come from? Where did that get instilled in you?
I would say two things. And actually, I answered one of these two is how I actually start off the book.
Yeah, with your dad.
My dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad, who is a pastor, and Joel's also a preacher's kid. my dad early on just would not answer questions. And what I mean by that is I would ask him, Dad, how should I do this? Or, when I actually wanted advice. And again, most of our lives from middle school to high school, we don't want any parental advice, right? But even before that, and then during those seasons when I would ask him, he would say things like this, well, what would you do if I weren't here? And I'd say, well, you are here. He'd say, yeah, but what would you do if I weren't here?
Right.
And what do you think? And, that's a good question. I think you should, and this was the worst. I think you should pray about it. And I'm like, no, just tell me. And, it really was kind of infuriating. And then I've tried to do the same thing with my kids because what he did without maybe they'll write a book about it one day.
Yeah, exactly.
This is so important for those of us in leadership. There's an extraordinarily important relationship between questions that we ask or questions that other people ask to us or of us and decisions we make. And if you ask the right questions, you're going to make a better decision. And the way we know this is we've all either thought at some point or said out loud at some point on the backside of a bad decision, we've said or thought, I should have asked more questions. Yeah. I should have asked better questions. I should have gotten more information. So we know that essentially our decisions are really almost no better than the questions that we ask. And there's this important relationship. So in the book, and the book isn't a leadership book, but it applies everywhere. Here's 5 questions because everybody has somewhat of a decision-making filter that we all use. And part of that decision-making filter, even though most of us don't even know what it is, it's so subconscious, it's so intuitive. There are questions. I mean, we've all asked questions like, will anybody find out? Is this going to hurt me? What if, so in the book, I'm basically saying, here's 5 questions you should add to your current arsenal of questions that pretty much guarantee you're going to make a better decision because our decisions are, oftentimes directed by the questions we ask or the ones that we don't take the time to ask. Then the second part of the question that you asked, I said there were 2 things. The other thing that I think has been instructive and just about everybody that are part of this podcast, you can relate to this because this has been part of your experience. Watching people undermine their own success, it's heartbreaking. And as a pastor, I don't know that there's anything more heartbreaking than watching a man or a father or a husband undermine his relationship with his wife, undermine his relationship with his kids. And you're watching this thinking, you're thinking somehow this is going to end well. And you are taking away from yourself the thing you want most, intimacy in your marriage, a future relationship with your adult kids. And we've all seen people do this financially, relationally, academically, it goes on and on and on. And so the whole decision-making thing, the decisions we make really are like the steering wheel of our life. And when you see somebody steering in a dangerous direction, you just want to jump in front of them and say, wait. Yeah. And so, part, I think, of what drives my passion around the whole decision-making thing and the correlation between decisions and questions is just like you, Joel, watching people unnecessarily undermine their own future and their own success. Because as everybody in the audience knows, there is already enough headwind in life. The last thing we need is to, make things more difficult for ourselves. There's enough resistance out there as it is in business or whatever it might be. So those are kind of the 2 things that fueled this project.
No, that's good. And it's funny. I don't know what you just said that just prompted this, but I watched the little video that you and Sandra put out, and she's sort of poking fun at you about how many questions you ask, and that's really true that you do that. And but the funny thing is, in the first chapter of the book, one of the things I wrote down, I don't have my notes in front of me, but one of the things I wrote down in my journal that you talked about in the first chapter of the book is you said when you start selling yourself on a decision. And we've all done that too. It's like, you know what? I know I probably shouldn't, or I don't think there's probably something wrong with this, or, in a different season, I wouldn't do this. And we begin to justify, we begin to sell ourselves on a decision. You say to pause. So how do you recognize that? And and why is it, first of all, why is it that we do that? One of the things you said was, if it was just a matter of hey, stop making bad decisions, we all would stop. But you can't do that. And so you got to recognize something that's a precursor. And I thought that was so good. Can you talk more about why we do that and how to recognize that when you start doing it?
Yeah. In the book, I say the moment, and I've tried, and this is something that I've kind of carried with me, different language through the years. The moment I start selling myself on something, that's when I should hit the brakes, because we rarely have to sell ourselves on a good idea. And we rarely have to sell ourselves on the right thing to do. So the moment I catch the internal salesman inside of me going to work, that's an immediate yellow flag, a yellow light or a red light. And one of the exercises I kind of take folks through in the book, and again, this is so intuitive once you hear somebody say it. If you went into a retail store and a sales associate actually said to you out loud the things that you say to yourself when you're talking yourself into a bad idea, you would be, and I would be so offended, we would just walk out of the store. I mean, if the sales associate said, hey, if you get home and don't like it, you can just donate it. You'd be like, what kind of sales pitch is that? Or here's one, I see that you already have one of these, but this one's newer. I mean, that's not a sale. So when we think about the things we tell ourselves, if someone were to say those things, we would be so offended. But again, we all have a little salesperson inside of all of us. And the moment we start selling ourselves on a bad idea, that's the moment to hit the brakes and go, wait. I am talking myself into something that has the potential to undermine my own future. So, why would I do that?
That's so good. And I actually, when you said the reverse of that, the idea that when somebody comes up with, an alternative, or there's a decision that comes up that's a good decision, that nobody has to sell you on that. Like, I just think about things where I've wrestled and I couldn't find another way. And it felt like, well, I don't have the only option I have is to make a bad decision. It doesn't seem like there's a good decision here. And then I'm sitting in a room and we're having a discussion about it, and somebody says the right answer. Like, they have that's the better decision. I don't need them to convince me to do it. I don't need anybody else to rally. It's like, oh,
you just know.
I'll pick up my pen. It's like, that's what we need to do. I think that's so good. Hitting pause. So here's what I'd love to do.
We're going to come back to that in just a minute. And one of the questions, that point you made right there, especially for leaders, is a really, really important thing, but we'll get to that in a minute.
No, that's good. Well, let's jump into the questions then, because you give in the book 5 questions for making better decisions, and I'd love for you to give a brief overview of each of the 5 of those. We don't have time to unpack them in detail today, but the 5 questions starts with the integrity question. Tell us what's the integrity question. Tell us a little bit about that.
And for leaders, this is so important. As we know, the most difficult person to lead is the person in the mirror. So the integrity question is this: am I being honest with myself? Am I being honest with myself? Pause. Really? Am I being honest with myself? Really? For those of you who have employees, if you've ever hired someone who was a liar, you just found out they're a liar. What do you do with a liar? You have to fire the liar. You can't lead a liar, right? You never know where you stand with a liar. And there's a little liar in all of us. And so, staring in the mirror and saying out loud, okay, you've told everybody else why you're leasing this. You've convinced your wife or your husband that this is the thing to do. You've convinced your friends. You've heard all the reasons and justifications you've used for everybody else. But Andy, why? And you don't have to change your mind, Andy, and you don't have to tell anybody else. You don't even have to follow through. But be honest. Why are you doing this really? Yeah. And in that moment, there's that terrifying clarity where suddenly we see, goodness, no, I'm not being honest with myself. I'm believing all the things I'm telling everybody else. This is ridiculous. So you can't lead yourself well, and I can't lead myself well as long as I'm lying to myself. And in the book, I pull out a verse from the Old Testament, but I spend a few minutes teasing out the historical context, and I won't spend a lot of time, this much time on all of them, Joel, I promise. But for leaders, this is so important, and it's an amazing leadership story where king after king after king in Israel, three in particular, make the same mistake. They don't learn from each other. And Jeremiah, the prophet, who's tried to warn 2 of them, is basically throwing his hands up in there like, what are you doing? You are undermining your own legacy. You're undermining your own kingship, your own leadership. And then he makes this statement. He says, the heart is deceitful above all things, and who can understand it? In other words, there's just something in us that has the potential and the propensity to deceive. We deceive ourselves. So recognizing that, asking this first question, okay, why am I doing this really? Am I being honest with myself really? It's that self-leadership. So that's the first one.
Yeah,
I won't spend as much time on the rest of them.
That was great. I think the thing that you said that really struck me there is, that's the epitome of deceiving yourself. When you want the best for yourself and you convince yourself to do something that's bad for yourself. Like, that's the epitome of the heart being deceitful. And I think we underestimate the ability of our heart to lead us astray. And so that's a really good question. Let's go to the second one. The second one's the legacy question.
Yeah.
What's that?
The legacy question is, what story do I want to tell? What story do I want to tell? We are writing the story of our lives one decision at a time. And we have the opportunity to write the future of this story. Now, we don't think in terms of story. We think in terms of events, and we think in terms of circumstances, and we think in terms of right now. So this is the legacy question. In other words, when I am telling the story of my life, when I have an opportunity to tell the story of my life, or when I have the opportunity to tell my children or grandchildren the story of my life, when I get to this part of the story, what story do I want to tell? And again, it brings terrifying clarity, because in that moment, we know. I won't retell it, but in the story in the book, I tell the story of a dear friend who went through a long, expensive, protracted divorce. And I just kept saying, hey, one day, this whole nightmare is going to be a story that you tell. It's just going to be a story that you tell. It's going to be a story that you'll tell your kids when they're old enough to understand.
Yeah.
What story do you want to tell? We just had a situation with an employee that transitioned from a different organization into our organization, and he was very worried about the fact that if he told his current employer that he was thinking about leaving, that he would immediately lose his job, that they would just say, well, you're out because you're not loyal. And that was he'd seen that happen before. He wasn't imagining it. And so he said, I'd be happy to meet you, but I need to meet you where nobody sees, And I said, okay. I said, let me take my I want to hire you hat off for a minute and put on my leadership coach hat for just a minute. And I said to him, I said, okay, regardless of what happens, you're going to end up on your feet. You're going to land on your feet. You're a great guy. This is just going to be a story that you tell. So here's the better story. Even though I knew I might lose my job immediately, I decided to be honest with my employer. Versus I kept it on the down low. I snuck out. I had all these interviews. And then at the last minute, when I knew I had the job, I said, this is just going to be a story that you tell. Which story do you want to tell? It's like, suddenly it's like, I don't want to tell the sneak around story. I want to tell hey, I gave them, this was the words I used. I said, the better story is you're going to give them an opportunity to do the honorable thing. If you do it the other way, they don't even have an opportunity to respond the right way.
Yeah.
And he did it. He told him, he was transparent. It all worked out. They didn't let him go immediately. So again, it's when we look at decisions within the context of, okay, when this is nothing more than a story that I tell, what story do I want to tell? So that's the legacy question.
Yeah. And I'm grateful for that influence in your life. It's why I felt the freedom to come talk to you before I was leaving there going, hey, I don't know where this is going, but I sense God is wanting us to be open to this thing, and to see you respond when I was fearful because I didn't want to leave. I wasn't looking to go anywhere, but you dream up all these things in your mind like, oh, well, Andy's immediately going to not like me. He's going to think I'm not with him. He's going to kick us to the curb. Those are things, especially like this guy you're talking about. If you've seen that happen, it's like, but I am so grateful of the story I get to tell. And part of the story is mine, but part of the story is yours, the way you responded, because in that moment, how you responded to me was the story you were going to tell about that situation. So, super grateful for that. Okay, the next one's the conscious question.
Yeah, this goes back to what you mentioned earlier. It's so important for leaders. The conscience question is there a tension that deserves my attention? Is there a tension, an internal tension that deserves my attention? And here's what happens. We're in the middle of making a decision. Everything on paper looks like, go to this column. This is the thing to do. This is what the industry standard is. This is how people normally handle this. Everybody is like, oh yeah. Everything looks good. And as you get closer and closer to signing or making the decision or pulling the trigger, there's just something on the inside and you can't put your finger on it. There's no reasoning. There's no logic to it. There's just an internal hesitation. And especially in leadership, pay attention to that tension. And here's why. Because if you're a leader, you have a leadership intuition. And intuition is a tricky thing. Intuition in reality always precedes the reasons we come up with to support our decisions. You should trust your gut as a leader, and you should trust your intuition, and you should trust it to the point that regardless of what everything looks like in this column, if there is a hesitation on the inside, don't brush by it and don't rush by it. Pay attention to that tension. And here's what happens, and most of us have lived long enough to have experienced this. You decide, no, I can't tell you why, and I know I look foolish, and I know I'm kind of holding up progress, and I know you're all just going to roll your eyes, but I just need more time, or I'm just not going to allow myself to be rushed. I just, I don't have, if you can use the word peace. I don't care what words you use. You just don't allow yourself to be rushed past that tension. And here's what happens. In time, you discover more information. In time, you realize something you hadn't realized before. Yeah. In time, as you said, Joel, you're sitting in a meeting and there was just something about it that just, I don't know. And then somebody says something, it's like, that's it. So as a leader, there's just something, you got to trust your gut, and you pay attention to that tension.
And I like the language you use in the book. You say something about, I'm going to mess this up, but like explore rather than ignore the tension or something like that.
Explore, don't ignore your conscience. Explore, when your conscience start, especially if it's a kind of a right or wrong thing, and you're like, but maybe I just have an overly active conscience and nobody really cares. No, never, ever, ever ignore your conscience, ever. That's that internal barometer. And again, sometimes it's a leadership intuition. Sometimes it's a moral intuition.
Yeah, that's good. And sometimes the Holy Spirit bringing conviction into your heart, trying to keep you. I mean, how terrible if God's trying to speak directly to you for you to go, I'm just going to keep going forward. So that's great. Let's go to the maturity question. That's number 4.
The maturity question is a question that my dad asked me before I can remember. It's a question that I've taught on so many times to students and college students. I even wrote a whole book on just this one question. The maturity question is, what is the wise thing for me to do? Not what is the right thing, the ethical thing, or the moral thing. What is the wise thing for me to do? And I tease this out in 3 dimensions: in light of my past experience, in light of my current circumstances, in light of my future hopes and dreams. What is the wise thing for me to do? Because it is human nature to snuggle up as close to immoral, unethical, and illegal as possible. Oh, I'm not, I'm right here. And consequently, there's no margin for error, ethically, morally, or legally, no margin for error. I mean, think about how we drive, right? We want to drive as fast as we can, as fast as the law will allow, without having an encounter with the law. So that's human nature. And that's not a big deal, if you're 5 miles over the speed limit. But asking the question, as again, this is in the context of decision making. Okay, I'm trying to make the decision. Okay, what is the, not legal, moral, ethical, what is the wise thing for me to, in light of my past experience, or in light of what we've just come through as an organization, in light of where we are right now as an organization, in light of where we want to be as an organization or a family, financially, academically, professionally, what is the wise thing for not everybody? What is the wise thing for me to do? Because my past experience is unique, my current circumstances are unique, and perhaps my future hopes and dreams are unique as well. And one more thing on this is, for those in the audience who who are theists, you believe there's a personal God, or you're a Christian, you believe there's a personal God and that Jesus was his son. Here's a universal experience. It's not a religious experience, but put a little religious terminology around it. When you think about your greatest regret, whatever it might be, it could be a moment in time, it could be a weekend, it could be a season of your life. When you think about your greatest regret, here's what's true of you, and I've never met you. That moment in time that you wish you could go back and relive or undo. I'm talking about the moment that you crossed over and there was no, point of no return. That moment where you would look back and say, that was illegal, that was immoral, that was unethical, was preceded by a series of unwise decisions. That unwise decisions that may not be illegal, immoral, or unethical, unwise decisions always lead to that moment in time, again, the point of no return. So when we choose wisdom over snuggling up to the edge of these other three things.
Yeah.
We're in a safe zone. There's a margin for error, and you're going to make better decisions, and you're going to have fewer regrets. So that's the
I'll tell you what, Jen and I have done this over and over in different seasons. That filter that you give, and I think it's so important. I mean, asking what's the wise thing to do is a great question, but breaking it down to, hey, okay, let's talk about what has God brought us through? What have we experienced in the past? Where are we right now? And we talk about this over and over. Is this next decision going to lead us in alignment with where we hope to be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? And it may seem like a great opportunity. It may not even seem like a bad thing. It maybe even seems like, something we could get away with or whatever. But like, is this really in alignment with where we want to go and where we want to end up? And that has been so helpful in our lives. The last one's the relationship. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, before we jump into that too, within the context of business and professional life, one of the things that I think baffles all of us is when we see a man or a woman, it's usually a man, who has it all together, who has succeeded in ways we can't even imagine succeeding, whether it's financially or in terms of reputation or politically or whatever they set out to do.
Yeah.
And then they just make what seems like out of the blue, spur of the moment, where did that come from, boneheaded decision that wrecks their reputation, that undermines their financial credibility. And we're like, what happened? And here's what we always find out happened when we get the backstory. One unwise decision followed by another unwise decision. These things didn't happen out of the blue. It was the culmination of a person who never asked, okay, not illegal, immoral, unethical. What is the wise thing for me to do? So to your point, Joel, it safeguards us in every area. And it's a question we should teach our kids to ask as early as they can begin to understand what we're talking about, because it's the maturity question. It's a sign of maturity.
You just made me think of a conversation I just had recently with a guy who is in an industry where he felt like when he got into this industry, he would never operate like everybody else operates in that industry, because it's kind of like, for him, it crosses an ethical, moral line. And now he's in a place where he's like, he's made a series of unwise decisions. He's now on the other side of where he thought he'd never be. And he's going, well, I just can't succeed in this industry if I don't do this. But I never thought I'd be here, and I don't know what to do. And it's like, I think you know exactly what you need to do. But, he's found himself in that place, and now he's in a situation where he doesn't like what he does. He doesn't like how it makes him feel. He's incredibly successful, but it's like he can't live with himself in that. And he didn't get there overnight. It's like you said, it was one decision at a time that led his life in that direction. And that has to do with many of these things, not just what's the wise next thing to do, but the story he's going to tell and all of those things. Let's talk about the relationship question.
Yeah. The relationship question is different than the other four. The other four, there is a tangible, or there will be a tangible ROI, return on investment. If you do the wise thing, you're going to make better decisions, have a better life. If you write a story worth telling, that's a better life. If you're honest with yourself, a better life. The relationship question is different. The relationship question will cost you something, but the relationship question is how you change the world and how you change a community and how you make your marriage better and how you ensure a long-term relationship with your kids. And the relationship question is this: what does love require of me? What does love require of me? And love, especially when we think about the love that God manifested for us through sending his son into the world, love always requires something of us. This is why we back off. This is why we bail out. This is why we blame. Love always requires. So the way I teach this is I say, hey, when you're in a relationship issue with your wife or your husband or one of your kids or even at work, to pause and ask the question, okay, in this situation, what does love require of me? When you're not sure what to say or do, just ask, what does love require of you? What does love require of me? And unfortunately, really like all these questions, the question is terrifying because it's so clarifying, because we almost always know what love requires of us. I don't always know what to believe. I don't always know what to think about the other person, but I almost always know, okay, if I'm going to set down my defenses and I'm going to do the sacrificial thing for the sake of this other person, I almost always know what that is. So there's no necessary return on investment because we have no control over how the other person responds to us.
Sure.
But this is the question that if everybody in your family and everybody in your community and everybody in our country would begin asking, the temperature would come down, there would be unity, there wouldn't be uniformity, but people would get along. So what does love require of me?
So can you talk about the tension of that in sort of a business environment or leadership environment? Because in some cases, my boss doesn't care if I'm loving to the person next to me. My boss doesn't care if this is the most loving thing to do for our client. My boss cares about me getting the sale. They care about the bottom line. They care about progress. They care about what we're building. So you're right, it'll cost you something. Talk to me about the balance of, I have certain responsibilities and commitment to the organization to succeed, and I may have a different value set or a different level of moral responsibility that I feel than my employer. Can you talk about the balance of that related to this question?
Again, this is a relationship question. So in every relationship, you can be kind. In every relationship, you can be patient. In every relationship, you can be generous. In every relationship, you can be compassionate. And remember, and this is where people get Christianity wrong. This is where Christians get Christianity wrong. When we talk about love as Christians, we're talking about the love that Jesus asked his followers to embrace. And the day after, he said, a new command I give you, love one another not the way you've loved each other. I want you to love each other the way I have loved you. And the following day, he put on a demonstration of love that cost him his life.
Yeah.
So this is about, I'm going to serve you regardless. This isn't about being nice. This isn't about being soft. This isn't about, losing your grit or losing your passion, your temperament, your Enneagram number, the way you're wired is going to determine all that. If you're a great salesperson, you're going to continue to be a great salesperson. If you're a leader, you're going to continue to lead. But in terms of how you respond and how you treat people, there's just never an excuse to refuse to treat people with respect and with dignity. And here's what we all know: we'd rather work for that person anyway.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
we want people. We want to attract people who operate with that. So there's rarely a long-term win by being unkind, impatient, and all those things. So this is kind of a virtue question. So I'm glad you asked that.
It is sort of having a long-term view though, because in the short term, answering the question, honestly, what does love require of you, doesn't always get you ahead in the short term. In fact, oftentimes it is about, like you said, it's about reflecting the sacrifice of Christ on behalf of somebody else. And so
it cost Jesus his life.
Yeah.
But we're still talking about him.
We've only got a couple more minutes. You connect this to these 5 questions and this idea of better decisions resulting from better questions to Paul's idea of renewing your mind. Can you talk a little bit about that in closing? And because I think it's important for us, I know all of these principles are grounded in Scripture, but this overarching idea I think is important for us to understand as a motivation and as a foundation for why we should begin asking better questions.
Yeah, the whole idea that Paul in Romans, where Paul talks about renewing our mind, it's basically it's informing our conscience so that we're bothered by the things that bothers our Heavenly Father. And renewing our mind is essentially trying to eradicate bad ways of thinking and replacing them with good ways of thinking. And renewing our mind is the key to understanding what God's will is for us. His general will, there's a general will, and his specific will. And to the degree that we're living within God's general will, we're going to have an easier time understanding his specific will for our life. And by specific will, I mean, should I take this job? Should I move my family? Should I leave and start a company? Those things. It's like, God, no, you didn't cover this in the New or the Old Testament. I need specific direction. So these 5 questions, I'm convinced, and there may be others, but these 5 questions in particular keep us within God's general will for our lives, which sets us up to have clarity around his specific will. It is God's will for you that you be honest with yourself. I know for a fact, right? It's God's will for you that you tell a story worth telling, because that's a story, you write a story worth telling because that's a story that honors him. It's God's will for you, straight out of the New Testament, that we live wisely. Paul says, don't live as unwise, but as wise, making the most of your days, because the culture is evil. It's God's will for you that you pay attention to your conscience. And you said it, Joel, while we were talking about that third question, that tension that deserves some attention. That oftentimes is the Holy Spirit just nudging us. And it is God's will for you that you, as your Savior did, that you don't come to be served, but to serve and to give your life as a ransom for many, to your family, to your kids, maybe to your community, maybe even literally. So these 5 questions, I think, keep us right in the framework of understanding and be able to discern God's will. And that whole process is what it means to renew our minds.
Yeah. Well, this is so helpful. And the reason I wanted to talk about this today is because I have seen, like you have, leaders in all sorts of different industries and different organizations and in different, sectors of the world make extremely bad decisions. Incredibly bright people, very smart people make terrible decisions that anybody on the outside is looking and going, I mean, why would you make that decision? I mean, it seems crazy. And I love the way we finished, because I think it's sometimes those people have separated their faith. They've separated the fact that God's even concerned or interested in communicating his will, his specific will to them, and to give some very practical advice to some questions you can ask, even from a business standpoint and a leadership standpoint, to go, hey, God has a specific will for your life in these certain circumstances, to have some questions that guide us along that. To make our minds in tune with God is incredibly helpful. So thank you so much for being with us today. Do you have any parting thoughts?
And pardon the the plug, but Joel knows me, so my heart, so you can follow up with your friends after I'm gone. What I really wish adults would do is teach their children these 5 questions.
Wow. That's
to
good.
Just build your parenting your parenting strategy around. And again, there's lots of things our kids need to know, but I'm just telling you, my kids are all in their 20s, 2 are married. We all want our kids to make good decisions. We're not going to be there to help them. And as my dad taught me early on, hey, you got to figure this out. Imagine our children or our grandchildren making decisions through the filter of these 5 amazing questions. So even if you don't feel like you need this content, I want to encourage you to teach your kids.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We're gonna jump off and have a bunch of conversation about all this stuff, but we're certainly grateful for your generosity today.
Well, thank you, Joel. I appreciate it.